Hi, my name's Madeline White. As you know, I created the Real Deal website to really make a national brainstorming session about why things aren't working the way they should be anymore. Real to all of us. From credit crunch to stress, to working 14-hour days, to juggling kids, houses, and this isn't just for women, this is for men too. We're all having a really tough time and we don't understand why things feel so fundamentally wrong. I've got several suggestions, and because a lot of other people had some as well and asked me to create something, I put this together. This is a first in a series of podcasts that looks at what we can do to change. And the idea this time is a warning from the past that is very, very important in terms of how we're living. The warning from the past actually comes from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. She wrote this, her backdrop, the start of Victorian industrial age, and yet this enormous freedom that the rising middle classes enjoyed at the end of the 19th century. The freedom where they decided they weren't going to have sugar anymore because of the slave trade. The freedom where they decided that women could crop their hair. There were so many opportunities and so many ideas. And the thing is, these actually came from the virtual anarchy of the gin laws in the middle of the century, which were all about trying to get people to behave better because actually the drug of gin was causing so many social problems. The thing is, because people didn't respect politicians and saw them as being pretty irrelevant generally, nobody really listened. So there's this extraordinary sense of movement and this extraordinary sense of freedom. And then suddenly, with the rise of the middle classes, they wanted to protect themselves. And there came this big lid on top from a great height that actually really stopped social movement in its tracks. Money was God. The freedom of commercialism, the freedom of the city was so important within the industrial age. And yet the traditional values, or back to basics, and this is how we should be, saw the emerging of this almost peculiar way of being that had never actually been seen before. And of course, the leader of that age, as it were, the embodiment of that age was Queen Victoria, who built the Victorian age upon this being a demure little woman enthralled to her husband, and yet the empress of a great industrial nations I should say. Of course, we have something similar with that, or we had, Margaret Thatcher, who used being more male than the male as her shield, but also traditional middle-class values of commerce and industry and ownership as her sword. But that was the start of the lack of social mobility, these traditional back-to-basics values that John Major then used, or tried to use as well. The key thing behind this was the backdrop. The Victorian age, the start of the Victorian age, was a backdrop to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a book that was written about something dead being reanimated, something that came out of the idea and the concept of progress being something grotesque and horrible and nasty. The important thing about this book was that it was actually written for the masses and to the masses, even though it was still, very much a class thing and the communication was still driven via the pulpit at that point. But actually, by writing it in the form of a novel, it got out to quite a lot of people and it started questioning. Sadly, it wasn't heeded, and the Victorian age continued unabated, with growing traditional values also showing a growing underbelly of child prostitution and hypocrisy in general. And then, of course, this wonderful industrial nation was born. Anyway, so what are the warnings for us? Well, I believe that we are in a similar situation. I think the stark warnings Mary Shelley created with Frankenstein, the authoritarian social and political structures, are too much like ours for comfort. Mary was attacking the foundations of society itself. She created a being made of dead parts, just as we're trying to reanimate a traditional way of being, because it's actually in some ways the only thing that we feel we really know. She was foretelling what would happen, not just in her age, but I think also to our age as well. Technology, medical, communicational, it's developing too fast for us to keep up. And the funny thing is, an increasingly authoritarian government is keeping a lid on things, just the way Victorians did, because they're terrified of what's going to happen. Is it working? Well, not really. And this is a scary thing, None of it's working anymore. It's like constantly reanimating dead body parts. Here are some of the ones that I think we're trying to do. One of them is gender stereotypical behaviour. Not just for women, men have to be harder, stronger and more masculine. That's what we're told constantly. By who? Well, that's another story in itself. The media, advertising, commercialism. The metrosexual new man is also, a wonderful thing. But actually, even the men that give into that stereotype find themselves undone by it. And women, well, superwomen, women who can't quite cope anymore because the demands to us are too strong. All this gender stereotyping is actually crippling us. We don't know where we are anymore. We don't know who we are anymore. Second one, our teenagers. Also known as MySpace and Bebo hoodies, brainwashed hoodies I should add. They're fine when they're being advertised and sold to, but the rest of the time we actually haven't got a clue how to deal with them. We're not engaging them, you see, that's the problem. Body part 3, our fear of different cultures. Not necessarily because we're racist, but again it comes back to this being frightened of change, being scared of things we don't know. We're more comfortable with those who look and behave like we do. Body part 4, an assumption that we're all bad, and I think this is really worrying. We have the most CCTV footage of any nation on earth. Tesco, Sainsbury's have store card information on us. The government agencies have information. We've got the biggest DNA database. At the moment, they're all separate, but can you imagine if they all got put together under the assumption that we all need protecting, that we're all bad? Watch the news, listen to the newspapers. We're being told that all the time. Okay, now what is keeping this alive? What's animating it? What's the driving force? We as a society have stopped fighting for people and started fighting for things. We are being marketed at aggressively to buy these things. Things are branded so they sell. Brands are ultimately fear-driven. They make money by making us believe that we're not quite good enough. They also pay for advertising space. This has given them unwarranted influence in terms of our media and thus in terms of how we perceive ourselves. The fact that we have allowed this to happen means we ourselves must shoulder equal responsibility for constantly reanimating rampaging consumerism and the market that drives it. Things have become our new basis to morality and authority until we as individuals assert the power that writers all across the board and many years ago said we have, the power we have. Otherwise we'll keep on being victims. Okay, so bottom line. Contribute to the real deal, become part of a movement, change things. This is only the first podcast. The next one will be about how we as a body can get behind things. I've given you a hint. I'll be broadcasting it Wednesday the 23rd, 7:30 GMT. So watch it, get involved, respond now, make your voices heard. Thank you.